You're listening to Wild Things and Wild Places, a Muley Fanatic Foundation podcast that aims to discuss issues and efforts related to the Muley Fanatic Foundation mission, the conservation of mule deer, furthering the sport of hunting, and sound wildlife management.
Everybody knows I'm a Muley fanatic.
It's time for Wild Things and Wild Places. And here's your guide, Joshua Corsi.
Gotta love that jingle. Never gets old. All right, joining me today, I've got the infamous Director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, Director Brian Nesvik. Hello, sir.
Josh, how are you?
I'm doing fine, and I can't tell you how much it means for you to carve out some time to visit. I've got a lot I want to cover with you. I've had some folks that, knowing I was going to be able to have this opportunity to talk to you, said, hey, will you ask him this, or will you ask him that, or where are we at on this, or where are we at on that? And I've got a list, but I guess, if anything, I thought it would only be appropriate coming out of September and October, and here we are in the early part of November, if maybe there was a general update or a synopsis of what the department's seen across the Cowboy State with this fall's hunting season?
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. So I think the way to maybe sum it up is no surprises. We anticipated that things were going to be pretty darn tough in a good chunk of western Wyoming and south central, and certainly that's what our biologists and game wardens saw at the check stations, is a pretty significant decrease in harvest and decrease in what hunters were seeing for deer, particularly those places we knew would be hardest hit, the Wyoming Range and really most of southwest Wyoming. It's interesting because the data from the check stations indicates a decrease in the harvest that is commensurate with what we believed we had for winter mortality. And yeah, no surprises. It's certainly not a good thing. It's not positive that hunters had a tough time, but it certainly wasn't a surprise. In the rest of the state, it was a pretty normal year as far as harvest. Those places that had either a normal winter or just a little bit of a severe winter still had some good hunter success. For me, of course, up in the northeast part of the state, in the Black Hills, that season just kicked off on November 1st, the bulk of it anyway. And so there's hunters afield right now, and same with the north end of the Bighorn Basin up around Cody. That general season is just kicking off here a few days ago. So sum it up, really no surprises, Josh.
Yeah, what would you say that you had more? Did you just have more feedback from the general public this year in western Wyoming, people reaching out to you personally, relationships that you have from your time in your old stomping grounds in Sublette County? I guess my take is that I have had more just concern from folks that normally maybe wouldn't even weigh in or bother to weigh in, but just a lack of just overall general deer in being sought and being seen, just gone, like off the landscape, missing.
Yeah, I did hear a lot of that. And again, I think we know that there's parts of that northern end of the Wyoming Range herd that might have experienced 70% adult mortality. And when you take that, and then all the fawns, when you take that big of a chunk out of a deer, people are going to see it on the ground, and they did. And I heard it. I heard some news in little small pockets here and there where people did see more than they were expecting. But the other thing that I heard was folks concerned, but the word was definitely out, and people were not, they expected that it was going to be pretty bleak.
Yeah. What hope, or is there some optimism? I think we, especially in the conservation community and hunters in general, you like to put your best foot forward knowing that there's still meaningful efforts to be had, and there's still a glimmer of positive impact that can be done. And I know it's just going to take time. You just can't have that type of loss from winter and be able to rebound and be able to quantify measurable differences quickly. It's going to require a great amount of patience, but there's other things I think that are probably being thought about. Do you want to share any of that?
I'll tell you that one thing that I always got to remind myself is that this is, for many of us, for me, I'm 53 years old, and this is the most severe winter, highest mortality, at least in that portion of the state, that I can ever recall. But while it was rare and it's unique, these deer have been here for thousands of years and have endured winters like this before and have recovered. The other thing that I have to remind myself is the Wyoming Range and bags they're mule deer factories, and they've got all the right makings habitat-wise to be able to recover as quick as they can, considering this kind of a significant loss. I do not anticipate that we're going to see anything quick. I don't think that It's going to be forever, though. I think it's a lot of prediction. We don't know what we're going to see this winter or next winter. But if I can tell you this, those deer that survived are going to have all the makings to be able to be extremely productive, because all that snow and moisture and water made things grow, and there's going to be less mouths to feed out on the landscape. The recipe for recovery is all the ingredients are there for it to happen as fast as it can with those kind of losses. There's not a significant amount of wildlife management efforts with a hunting season that can really impact that recovery. It's all about doe deer having fawns and being fat when they enter winter. And we don't hunt any doe deer. And so there's not a lot to be done, any kind of hunting season prescriptions that can really help. We are addressing large carnivore seasons to long term. There's always going to be large carnivores on the landscape. I think that increasing the opportunity for hunters to take more large carnivores in the coming years will potentially help speed the recovery up. But again, there's just not a lot of deer out there. So even that, I don't want to paint too promising of a picture that we're going to solve this problem or make a fast recovery by increasing lion quotas, as an example. The other thing I think that's important in my brain anyway, is that we are very fortunate that we've been able to partner with Dr. Monteith for a decade now. And we have really good information. We have a really good long-term research project going on there. And so we've got some information that we otherwise wouldn't have had that is hopefully going to be able to inform future decisions on what are the best management practices on the ground that we can implement that are going to continue to harbor an incredible deer herd over in the Wyoming range. So anyway, I talked a lot there, but that's what my predictions are anyway on what recovery looks like and what the department can do.
Yeah, you've touched on a couple of things that have brought up a couple of questions I'd like to ask in regards to the recovery of, when you mention the rebound or recovery of this herd, and it's starting with the health and the fat levels going into winter of our fawn crop. Some of our neighboring western states, Idaho and Utah, and I've visited with some folks from the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. They implemented some winter feeding research projects this past winter to see how that was going to work. They're still waiting to publish some of that information, but I anticipate they're thinking that it'll be out before the end of the year. But early indications is that they had some success, although I know there's a lot of challenges with that, and it's been something that's been met with some resistance with the state of Wyoming. I have asked both Idaho and Utah that were any of these areas that these were implemented, did they test positive or have positive tests with CWD? And they said absolutely not. That was one of the triggers that would not allow them to move forward, is if they did have positive CWD tests within those landscapes. Some of our areas in western Wyoming that have not had positive CWD, do you think there's interest in an effort to learn how supplemental feeding in the wintertime might be utilized in extreme situations, or is that just not on the table for Wyoming?
You point out some really good points here, and that is that when you start talking about congregating animals artificially, the number one concern you have to have is disease, because any disease, and not just CWD, but anything that's there, is exacerbated when you concentrate them. And so that's, for me, is when we start talking about feeding, that's one of my biggest concerns. My second one is being able to do it at a scale that can be meaningful and be effective. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of acres of winter range. We're talking about deer that are dispersed across ginormous geographic areas. And so if you implement feeding at such a scale, at such a large scale, in a way that can actually be effective and actually affect the population. And frankly, Utah was not able to do that. In those very localized areas where they fed deer, they saved some deer. They had lower adult mortality where they fed. But when you look at how many they fed and compared to how many deer are in the state of Utah, it's a very small fraction of the total deer population. And at the end of the day, I'm not sure that they could tell you that they actually made a difference at the population level. And then the other thing they learned in Utah, and you're right, they haven't published this in final form yet, but the fawns that did go to these feeding sites, when everybody else left, the fawns wouldn't leave. The fawns stayed there. And that's certainly concerning for me. Is there interest? There's definitely interest from members of the public in trying something. I can tell you that in order for the department to get behind anything like that, we've got to be able to answer some of these questions and be able to figure out how we can mitigate those potential really bad impacts. And I will also tell you that there is a lot of members of the public that I hear from that are like, don't you dare go down this road. Don't even think about feeding. And it's very complex. It's certainly contentious. And at the end of the day, I don't that we can do it at scale that will actually have a positive impact that people would hope to get out of a lot of money, a lot of time. And if this was about feeding and you could make a difference, we would raise the money. So I don't want to make this all about money, but you certainly don't want to go out and spend millions of dollars and have no impact. That's not a good use of sportsman dollars. And that's another concern that I have too.
And I know you hold that concern in very high regard and being fiscally responsible, recognizing that sportsmen play a major role in funding the department and the management of our wildlife. But let's talk about CWD, because I do think that particularly in western Wyoming, where you don't see it as prevalent as you do in other portions of this state, if you're not familiar with it and living with it day in and day out, it's not that you're uneducated, but you just haven't been exposed to the impacts of CWD. But there are places in Wyoming that you could recommend if you wanted to see the impacts firsthand of what CWD looks like in the latter stages. There are multiple areas in this state where you could go and you could talk to people in those areas, and boy, it's devastating, is it not?
And in those places where prevalence is highest, there's population level impacts. I think one thing that is really important on this topic is CWD is 100% fatal. No deer or elk contracts CWD and lives. There are varying times at which it causes the mortality, but it's 100% fatal. The other thing we know by watching this disease since the 80s is that once it shows up, it's just a matter of time until the prevalence does increase once it shows up in an area. And a lot of times as it's moved across the state, it's taken quite some time for that prevalence but there's no doubt that it will. And one of the things that our CWD working group that you were a member of looked at was when we know it's there, what can we do to mitigate or to slow down the increase in prevalence? And again, this points back to a real concern with feeding and concentrating animals. We know that CWD it's weird. It's bacteria. It's not a virus. It's a misfolded protein. It actually it's an environmental contamination. So the prions, these misfolded proteins get shed out on the ground, and then animals come in contact with it and they contract the disease. They don't even have to have contact with another animal. And with that said, the other thing I think is important is even with all the work that has been done for 40 years on this disease, there's still more that we don't know about it than what we do know about it, which that's troubling. And we don't know all the ways that it's transmitted. We certainly don't have any way to prevent it. There's no vaccine or there's no way to prevent it. I think that you make a really good point. Folks that don't have to see this disease, they don't have high prevalence in the areas that they hunt or that they recreate or that they view deer, can be apathetic about it. It's not in their backyard, but you can look at this disease from southeast Wyoming to the entire state, almost, and it will come. We just hope that it's at a rate that's as slow as is possible.
Yeah. Do you believe that the lack of deer this year that were available for sportsmen and sportswomen to have success with their pursuit, users of this resource, and the lack of deer that I'm assuming that it's probably fair to say that the testing for CWD in some of these areas, as the department continues to put forth a very robust effort in this process of testing and collecting samples, that those numbers were down just because our deer are down. But did you see some surprises with some of what was found with some of those samples that the lab did test?
No, you're right. We were definitely down in those areas where we've got way fewer hunters. I haven't seen we have had some new positive CWD areas. None of those have been a surprise to me. All of them have been right on the edge of areas that already have CWD. I would say that what we saw is pretty consistent with what we've seen as this disease has moved across the state.
Okay. Yeah. I know that's like fighting an invisible enemy. The challenges are just enormous. Yeah. Good luck on that one, sir.
The day that somebody can find an efficacious vaccine for CWD, we owe that person a great debt of gratitude.
Yeah, no,
wonderful news.
Has there been efforts with the Department of Ag? And you talk about that some problems you can throw all the money at in the world and it's not going to help. But this is a problem that probably does need some financial assistance in just being able to put the priority on the research and the different trials it needs. Is the Department of Ag, are they a possible player in CWD research? I would think it would be to their benefit also.
The answer to that is yes, the U.S. Department of Ag. Our Department of Ag here in Wyoming really doesn't have anything related to wildlife disease in their purview, nor does the Wyoming Livestock Board. And since CWD is not a disease that affects livestock, they have not had a role. But I will tell you, at the national level, the United States Department of Agriculture has been engaged in research. Our department has been engaged in research. There have been some developments they're not monumental at a scale of being able to find this, but there are some things going on. We're very close right now to finalizing and being able to implement a live animal test for that. It's called RT Quick. And that would be another tool when that's finalized for us to be able to do maybe some new management text with regards to trying to manage CWD. As an example, if you can take a live animal and test them and know whether they're positive or not, it could inform a decision on larger scale, things like a test and remove pilot program where you test them, and if they're positive, you remove them from the population. Those are things that have been discussed. The department certainly hasn't put anything. We just don't have the tool yet to do that. We haven't put anything on yet. But those smaller developments like that in the research are continuing. CWD is an issue in a lot of other states and also in Canada. And so there's work going on all the time on this to try to find tools. For the captive cervid industry, it's a real challenge because essentially when CWD finds its way into any kind of a captive deer, it moves through so quickly that it pretty much forces them to depopulate. So there's a financial motive for some folks to try to find ways to either cure or mitigate CWD. My hope is we've done some great things in the United States on wildlife disease. I hope that sooner rather than later, we can through good research, find some better ways to manage this disease.
Yeah, I hope so too. It certainly is needed. And I'm glad to hear that the U.S. Department of Ag, because they're the ones with the printing press, right? They can. The feds seem to just be able to print money. So that is on that list. But your top three concerns as the director of Wyoming Game and Fish Department, what are your top three concerns for our mule deer state?
So I will tell you that most of it relates to habitat, and there's a couple of things there that I'll talk about. First of all, I've lived in this state my whole life, and I've watched over the last 3 decades this state have more and more cheatgrass. And we have these gigantic monocultures now that never used to be there, just huge landscapes that are completely covered up in cheatgrass. And cheatgrass is not a good thing for wildlife, and it dang sure isn't a good thing for mule deer. And you create those kind of monocultures like that of an invasive that's not native, you eliminate a lot of those things that mule deer need, like forbs. It can even have, effects on the sagebrush communities. It can have effects on the typical species, mountain mahogany, those kind of species that are really important to mule deer. And so cheatgrass, I call it the cancer of Wyoming. We need to declare war on cheatgrass, and we are taking some efforts to do that. The other thing that I'm continually concerned about is just development. And when I say development, all things surface disturbance. Look at Wyoming over the last 10 years and look at how many of our towns and people have developed housing subdivisions in places where it used to be mule deer habitat. I'm concerned about any kind of surface disturbance that impacts mule deer habitat. We've got, of course, the normal extractive industries that have always been there, but now we've got solar and wind development that is on the horizon. And we've already had a lot of wind development. Those surface disturbances in mule deer habitat are concerning. And I think if I was to nail down one more important, I've got a lot of concerns with mule deer, but I think that we are now seeing some evidence, and it's preliminary, but we're seeing some evidence that potentially other species are competing with mule deer, like elk. In places like in the Laramie Range, where we have a lot of elk and not nearly as many deer as we used to have, that used to be an inverse relationship. There used to be a lot of deer and not very many elk, and that we've seen that in other parts of the state. And so I am concerned that we're seeing this phenomenon has been going on, that deer have been getting out competed by elk in certain parts of the state. And that certainly concerns me with regards to mule deer.
Would you say we have an elk problem?
I would, absolutely. We have places in eastern Wyoming where we have an elk problem, for sure.
Yeah. How much value, Director, do you put on citizen science and folks that have lived on the landscape for 80 years and generational and have seen changes on those, particularly with the areas that used to be littered with deer and have been replaced now with elk? Is that type of citizen science, is that great value to you? Does that resonate?
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely invaluable. You can't place any kind of a price tag on what that information. I do it myself. I've lived through, I just gave you an example of watching cheatgrass show up in places where it never used to be. And you're exactly right. We have private landowners who have been watching not just deer, but all wildlife for generations, that have even kept records of wildlife that they've had on their ranches. We've got folks that are longtime Wyoming residents that have been hunting here forever or recreating here forever or working out on the landscape forever. And those observations are just invaluable. It's why I believe so strongly in us doing our work with science as a basis, but also with robust public involvement in the decisions we make. At the end of the day, our state statute says that wildlife is the property of the state, meaning everybody that lives in this state, that the department's charge is to manage those wildlife resources in trust for the public. So it is inherently important for the public to have a vote and a say in how their wildlife is managed. And with that said, those same folks that are glad to sit down and help provide input are also expecting the department to base our decisions in science. So it's a real balance, and bringing all those different pieces together to try to make a good decision.
Gathered around the campfire's flickering glow, stories ignited, bridging hearts and minds as the world outside faded and connection reigned supreme. Welcome to Campfire Chats.
Today for Campfire Chat, very excited to be able to make this opportunity some other work-related stuff and take advantage of the time of you being able to get down here, Jesse, from Lander. Jesse Johnson with the Wyoming Wildlife Federation, colleague of mine in the conservation community, someone that I respect tremendously. You do a lot of work, and I know we're going to talk about hunting because that's what Campfire Chat is, but we got to have a little background about who you are, what you do, and instead of me telling everyone what I know, why don't give us a 30-second.
I work for the Wyoming Wildlife Federation. I'm their government affairs director. I'm also a co-founder of Artemis Sportswomen, which is a women's hunting and angling coalition built to bring women into the space a little bit more, especially in leadership. I've always believed that hunting and conservation are not separate, that if you are a hunter, you have a requirement and an obligation to become part of the conservation world. So a little bit about me. I was an adult onset hunter. I did not grow up hunting, but I would say for me, hunting is not so much separate from my work because my work came from my hunting. And had I not loosed an arrow on the mule deer that 10 years ago made me a hunter, I wouldn't be in this seat now.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I had a moment walking up to that animal where I'd been volunteering actually with Muley Fanatics early on. And I started to realize that you could have a career in something that you were very passionate about. And when I walked up to that mule deer, I had this moment where I went, oh my God, I have to give something back because I've just taken. And I've never, it sounds so cliche to say that like that, but it really was an aha moment for me.
That's very profound.
It was it was life-changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, hunting is very tied to the conservation world for me.
They do. They go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Not the Elk Foundation has it trademarked, but hunting is conservation.
It is, and not in the way that people like to defend it, though. It's just because you buy a license doesn't mean you're a conservationist. But if you're out there and you fall in love with a place and you show up to help keep it what it is, or you show up to, whether it's you show up to the voting polls, whether you show up to conservation meetings, whether you just donate $5 or $10 here or there for work that you consider good work, that's all part of it.
Yeah. Speaking of the voting polls, you spend a tremendous amount of time the first quarter of the year basically living as a resident of Cheyenne.
Yes,
and we're very grateful. Every resident across the Cowboy State should be extremely grateful to have that type of dedicated effort to someone who is there representing sportsmen and sportswomen in what is a very fast and furious time. This year, a budget session coming up will be even quite faster and quite furiouser, if that's even a word. But
bracing myself for it.
That's an important, in my mind, it's an important voice that needs to be heard. And just in the experience that you and I have had in that arena in Cheyenne, don't you think it's still a fair assessment to say, even though Wyoming folk tend to think of Wyoming folk being very similar, there is still a very large underrepresented sportswomen within our legislative body?
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. I think it happens because Wyoming's rural, like hunting and fishing is very part of our way of life. So everybody everyone knows a hunter here. That's actually pretty rare, I think, for most other states. But you are like 1 degree separated probably from a hunter in this state. I can't remember what the numbers are, but it's 30-ish% of our population, I think, buy hunting and fishing licenses. So there's a lot of people. But because of that, we don't realize that we still have to show up and let our sort of thoughts be heard when there are folks that are making decisions about that. And hunting and fishing ultimately is a state decision. Everything that the legislature does has effects on hunting and fishing because the state manages our wildlife, and the legislature is who sets the state laws. That makes a huge difference. I think a lot of our legislators are hunters, but not every hunter, even the legislators that are well-versed in wildlife policy or wildlife management or population modeling and the work that our Wyoming Game and Fish does, even if they've gone out and hunted a mule deer, they don't necessarily understand the work behind what it took to have that mule deer on that landscape. And that's where that lack of representation really is effective, or not effective, but it causes an effect. Because if all you know is the anecdotal stories and you don't know the peer-reviewed science, or you don't know the voices of the biologists and the wardens and the hunters on the ground and what they're seeing, and all you talk about is your anecdotal, which is a very fair way to approach something. If that's all you know, you don't always get the whole picture. We only get maybe 1/10 of the story at the legislative level sometimes, and we have to work really hard to bring the hunter's voice forward because you're battling now with someone's personal experience, however profound that was, as well as bringing the peer-reviewed science and the data and the population modeling, which is never quite the sexy thing to put in front of someone.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on it, Jess, but I do think that citizen science is extremely valuable. I think that has got to be a tool in the toolbox. We have to be able to, our greatest resource in the Cowboy State is our residents.
Our people. Yeah.
That's it. And you have to be able to have a way to tap into that resource to understand their observations. In a lot of ways, that's the role that you have with WWF, is to be able to be down there and to be that voice. And so I appreciate that. Enough about that, though, because we could go on and on about this and how valuable this is and some of the good work that you have done and continue to do, and works that we find to be very valuable, specific to our own mission. But this campfire chat, I want to talk about hunting. Let's put all the politics aside, all the policy arena.
Come back to the campfire.
Yeah, let's go back to the campfire. So you identify as a hunter.
I do. And
you kill stuff and you eat it.
I kill stuff and I eat it, and I don't kill things I won't eat.
Fair enough.
That's my own sort of...
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. Mm-hmm. It's like I learned that lesson the hard way a very long time ago as a young boy, shooting a mag, and my dad saying, "Why'd you do that? Now you're going to eat it. You're going to bring that magpie home and you're going to eat it."
I love your dad for this.
And I don't know why I did it. I just did it. I thought that's a little more fun than shooting at a paper plate or an aluminum can. But that really made me think. When I don't know, I was young. I was single digits, 9. I don't know.
That philosophy's made me a very cautious duck hunter. I have accidentally shot a merganser.
Did you eat it?
Yep. Didn't like it.
But you did.
But I did.
Yeah, but I think that's something that I would like to think the majority of hunters are mindful of, is that you are taking a life and you carry that with a great responsibility, a significant amount of just your own personal feelings in the field. I think that it brings you closer to nature. But I think it makes you a better hunter, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And I think the part of hunting that always, people are like, why do you hunt? And because I didn't grow up hunting, I'm a woman, which immediately always people are like, whoa, you hunt? When I'm outside of the hunting industry side of it.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that, and I was hoping we could get to that. So thanks for bringing that.
Yeah.
What challenges as a woman for what is predominantly a male-dominated recreational activity? What challenges can you share that I'm not aware of as a man that I would be foreign to knowing because I've just never experienced them?
I don't even know that I would call it like a challenge. I've been very welcomed into the hunting community. When you think about like just logistical challenges of sometimes it's hard to find a bush big enough to pee by.
You're right. I don't know that one.
Things like that. Yeah. Or you're in a tree stand with a harness on and overalls, and the male who's the tree next to you just gets to pee.
Yeah.
And you don't. But those are like the funny ones that you notice.
So let me ask you this, because I have 2 adult daughters. I've raised girls, and I raised both of them to be hunters. The one thing that my youngest daughter would say, and I'm just curious if you would confirm this or not, she has, although it's getting better, she will tell you that it is getting better, but for the longest time, it seemed like the gear was always catered to the male physique, and it just didn't fit the female body right.
Pants.
That's a big
Pants is where it's the hardest thing, because there's all shapes of humans,
Sure.
but women tend to be curvier and men tend to be built straight up and down. And pants that are made for men are built straight up and down and very rarely fit hips or a backside of women. And so when I started hunting, I was wearing my boyfriend's pants, and I had a rubber band that would go around because they would fit as far as length and in the leg. But at the top where my hips were, they wouldn't. So I just have a rubber band or a little drawstring tied through the hole and around the little button. So it probably looked like I almost had a maternity pant on at that point, but they didn't have that. And I remember I went to a conservation conference, and industries you have all like the gear tents are up everywhere, and you can walk around and go see all the new gear for the new year and look at it all. And I walked up, and I was definitely lying at this point because I did not have $1,000. I walked up, and I remember being like, if you can show me a piece of women's gear, I will spend $1,000 on a kit here for women's gear. And I had a couple clothing industries pick up a hat, and a couple that were like, we have unisex jackets and stuff like that. And I was like, nope, not good enough.
Not going to work, is it?
And it was First Light, actually, that said, we don't have it now, but we're developing it. And it was when I'm a pro team member with First Light, and have been for about as long as I've been hunting, because of that discussion that I had with them. And they turned around and brought me onto the team, and it's been really a profound and lucky experience, because now I get to test a lot of the women's gear. Sometimes they don't get it right, and we send it back, and
Go back to the drawing board.
They go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of thought and work. And I'm certain other industries, like whether it's Sitka or Prois or these other really great Kuiu, all of these different companies that are building gear do the same thing. But First Light was my experience, and they brought me into the family and have kept me there. And that was when I say I haven't felt a ton of challenges, it's because I've been very lucky in people opening the doors for me. And I've been very conscious of wanting to turn around and open doors for other women, because the one thing I felt getting into it, and I came to hunting in a little bit of a backwards way, where I started as a bow hunter and continued to be primarily a bow hunter. So I started with archery, and I started with archery sagebrush mule deer, which I realize may as well just start with the hard stuff, because everything else will feel a little easier after that. And that I was looking for women in the hunting space to look up to. I was coming from a conservation mindset. I'm the daughter of ranchers. My dad would just drill into me that you take care of the land and the land takes care of you. So that's something I grew up with. And I was looking for that mindset in the hunting industry and not seeing it anywhere, and wanting to see it from a woman. Because then you'd have people like Steve Ranella and Randy Newberg and some of these wonderful humans that have pushed this narrative and have done a great job bringing conservation back into the forefront of the hunting thought. But there was no women speaking like that, and I was wanting to see that. And I felt like that was a challenge for me, because I started feeling that my voice would never quite be valid if I tried to do that, which is not a real thing, but if you don't see yourself reflected, and I think the perfect example is even in like conservation work, if you don't see someone who is like you doing something, sometimes you don't realize that it's an option. So I had never really seen women bow hunting and out there doing that growing up. I spent some time in Northern California on ranches, and then Montana and Wyoming when I was a much younger kid. But my high school was in Northern California, and I wasn't seeing anybody hunting, let alone women. And so I may have loved that had I had that in front of me at that time of my life, but I didn't. And I didn't see it until I came back to Wyoming and back home here. And now that's been the challenge, is like putting mentors out there and people that are connecting the conservation and the hunting and talking about hunting in a new way, because I struggle with the grip and grins. I struggle with the narrative that's being put out, because that's not what hunting is for me. Hunting is this incredible relationship with this animal, because I'm a bow hunter and you spend a lot of time looking at them before you get close enough. And it's this contract put out that I will give you a good death, and that responsibility is on me. And so that always brings a lot heavier feel. When I start talking about that, especially in the hunting industry, I think a lot of people just look at me like, what? And they all get it because they're all hunters. That's all a similar feeling, but that's not the narrative that the industry is putting out. And that's something where I think at least women, and more women being involved, are alleviated of that pressure to fill the grip and grin and ego side of it that comes along. Not that's real, but that's out there.
Sure.
And women don't have the pressure to fill that. Yeah. So I actually think less than a challenge, we have the freedom to have emotion around hunting. And I think that's profound.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. And I thank you for doing that and being a trailblazer to make that message be heard within the arena and the circle that you have, because it's very important.
Yeah.
And it needs to continue to be promoted that way. At the end of the day, we are hunters and gatherers. I hold that with the highest regard. I like to know where my food came from that I'm about to consume.
Yeah, it's probably the most important part of my life is what I would say that
it's your body, right? I mean, you've been given this gift of life, and that's the fuel you're putting in it, and you know where it came from. You know every aspect of it.
It's the same as,
Have you heard this before? Have you heard that a corn-fed whitetail out of Kansas tastes different than a sagebrush-eating stinky old mule deer buck?
Yes, I have. I love me the stinky old bucks.
Yeah. Favorite hunt?
Favorite hunt I've been on, or favorite?
Yeah, we'll do two. Favorite hunt that you have had, and then dream hunt that you would like to have.
Oh, that's tall order. I think every hunt I've been on ends up being my favorite hunt, but I had the incredible, humbling honor to go on a 2-week Northwest Territories Dall sheep hunt. And a friend of mine had won this hunt at the Less Than One Club. She was from Alaska. She was an outdoors educator, was just getting into hunting, but basically gifted the experience because she was like, I can do this over the counter. I live in Alaska. And I'd told a story about losing an elk on a podcast years ago that NPR picked up, and she'd heard that story. We connected over that, and she gifted this experience. The whole part of that is why that's my favorite hunt, is the fact that it was this, I told a story about messing up and losing this elk and not finding it until it was rancid and rotten, and the feeling that came with that. And I told it to a room full of non-hunters in Jackson, Wyoming, and got this incredible response that came of it, and then did the podcast around it. And then this fell out of the air into my lap of this experience to go do something that I will never be able to afford to do.
Yeah, that's a very special hunt.
It was incredible. Yeah. And I was in a place where wildlife hadn't seen people.
Yeah, where there's no dominion of man.
And we were with the Gaina River Outfitters, which is just some of the most incredible people I've ever met, who live in this place and run this outfitting business up there in the McKenzie Mountains. It was, epic. Totally and completely epic. But I would say that is tied for my favorite hunt, because the one that actually, I think made me who I am was the man who taught me to bow hunt was a boyfriend at the time. He was an amazing conservationist, just great human, actually helped start the 10 country chapter, just good person. When we broke up, I had this moment where I didn't know if I could do it alone, because I'd always ever been hunting with him, and he'd made a lot of the decisions, not because I was new, and he's a veteran in that.
Right, just seasoned.
Yeah. And so when we broke up and I was really digging deep to figure out what that meant for me, I was really scared that hunting was over for me, because I was like, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah. Can I do this alone?
Yeah.
Can I
with a bow even?
With confidence. Yeah.
And I went out, and I finally just had this moment where I was like, I'm never going to find this out unless I just go try. And so I went out into a place that I'd been many times, and I'd watched deer there. I felt like honestly, like I look back now and I was like, I totally knew what I was doing. I just didn't feel it in the moment. And so I got out there, got up before light. I hiked 4 or 5 miles in the dark, got up, was sitting on this hill, watched 4 or 5 mule deer bucks bed down in this place, deep beds. And I went, I know how to stalk it. I know how to do this. And I had my eye on this 4-point, and I had only seen 4 or 5. And to get around to this area where I'd seen them, you had to leave their eyesight, hike another 1.5 miles or so, and then get back in. So you have to hope that those deer are still there when you come back in. So I did that, came back in, and took my shoes off. I had my socks on. I had my bow in my hand. I was shaking like a leaf because I was just like excited, and I don't know what I was worried about, but I was stalked in buck fever. Yeah. It was more, oh my God.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're going to be there. I was like feeling like I was dumb.
Don't you wish you could just bottle that up though? Isn't it such an invigorating high?
And to be that, like, yeah. And at that point I was so ignorant of that it was like this whole experience is happening.
Yeah.
And stalked in, and there's dried balsam root everywhere, which sounds like rattlesnakes when you step on it and makes everybody stand up. But I got in and I could see antlers in the sagebrush, and sun was coming down. It was hot. I was so sunburned. It took like 4.5 hours to get in, and I got to 15 yards and stepped on a balsam root. And
It's
not
like the forest came alive.
4 or 5, but 15 deer stood up. And there was the 4 that I'd been looking at was like right in front of me with a doe right behind him. And so I had drawn, but I let down because there was just no shot without pass through. And I left without having shot something. But I left being like, I can do this. It was like that feeling of I did everything but the shot, and there was no shot, but oh my God, I am a hunter, because I wasn't just like relying on someone else. It was me. And that still tops. That's hand in hand with the Dall sheep hunt for best hunt for me, because it's like what told me that I could do it.
And what's fascinating for me, and I'm so glad that you had a recollection of a hunt that did not involve a harvest. Too often there's this pressure of, did you fill your tag, or how was your hunt? Oh, the hunt was great. The killing was terrible. The hunt was fabulous.
Yeah, the hunt was amazing. The experience.
Because that is truly what I think drives me to go to the field every fall is certainly I want to be able to put meat in the freezer. I know that's an important staple for my family. We enjoy wild game. It's very important to our dietary consumption. But the hunt, that is truly the love of why I like it.
And it's not the thing. People are like, isn't that what hiking is? And you're like, no. It's not.
I like hiking, but it's not hunting.
Because like when you're hunting, you're so much more aware of what's going on around you. You're aware of the wind and the time of day and the other animals around you and the ground. I don't know a hiker that is hiking and looks down and is, oh, the mule deer buck went this way, and oh, the wind is blowing this way. And like someone that hasn't...
The intimacy that you have with nature cannot be duplicated doing something else.
Because for the first time, you embody animal. You become a predator of the landscape, which is why I think that we feel like we belong and that hunting is this natural thing, is because for the first time, we're actually doing what we evolved to do. We didn't evolve to sit and look at computers or work on stocks or stuff like that. Right. We evolved as hunters and gatherers, and our little brains function best as that. And I think we find that relief when we start doing that, and that's part of what keeps drawing you back as well. Is you're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
And honing those skills year after year to become that apex predator of your prey. All right, dream hunt.
Dream hunt. Oh, sitting here in the Rock Springs Green River area, I think my dream hunt has actually become a little mountain mule deer.
Yeah, that's such a special landscape, isn't it?
It really is. And I hadn't been out there until about 5 or 6 years ago. And I think I was out on a tour with you when I first saw it. And it has not left my mind since then. And I put in for that tag every year, knowing I probably won't draw. Also because I'm very happy to hunt general. Where I live in Lander, amazing general hunting. So I always put in for really hard to draw tags. And that 102 Wyoming mule deer hunt, I think, has hit the top of the list for me because it's a place that's exceptional and because I don't know. I don't know why it got into me.
To think that place is just that close. If you're just passing through on the I-80 corridor,
you would never know it was out there.
Never have an idea what the Little Mountain area encompassed.
And how much work has gone to so that it exists there. But the mule deer, I wouldn't say no to going back to a Northwest Territories.
Oh, of course
Doll
not.
sheet. If I'm being honest, I think that mule deer is pretty high on.
I hope that happens for you someday, Jess.
Oh, you'll know if I draw. I'll call you.
No, I really do. I hope that works out for you. That'd be a magical hunt for you, for sure. Hey, I appreciate you taking this time and just visiting about hunting, what it means to you. It's very clear that it was something that came to you later in life, but it runs very deep. It's defining on who you are and what you do. And I think it's obvious to anybody who listened to this, they'll be able to pick that up in just the selection of your words, how you've articulated that there's passion behind those words, and that it truly is a way of life, of something you have chosen to let define you.
I'm really honored to have this time with you, and it came about pretty quickly, so I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah. Jess Johnson, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that wraps up another episode of Wild Things and Wild Places. But remember, the journey doesn't end here. Make sure you never miss out by subscribing. Whether you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, streaming us on our website, or following us on social media, subscribing is the best way to stay connected. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more wild episodes.
Everybody knows I'm a muley fanatic.